The seventh cycle, the dead zone. My name is Elias. I'm a field technician for a telecommunications company specializing in the maintenance of microwave relay towers in the dead zones of northern Michigan. Most people think of Michigan as Great Lakes and cherry orchards. But once you get deep into the Manistee National Forest, the world turns into a dense, suffocating sea of jack pine and oak. It's a job of heights and silence. I spend my days climbing 200 feet into the air far above the canopy, where the only sound is the wind whistling through the galvanized steel. You learn to appreciate the isolation. You learn that the woods don't care about your presence. 3 nights ago, I was finishing an emergency repair on a repeater near the Big Manistee River. The sun was dropping fast, bleeding a dull, bruised orange through the skeletal branches of the oaks. The first wrong thing was the scent. In late autumn, the forest should smell of dry needles and cold mud. But as I descended the tower, the air grew heavy with a cloying, primal stench. It smelled like wet, matted fur, old blood, and something metallic like a handful of rusty nails. It was a scent that triggered a physical reaction in my gut, a predator alarm that humans haven't used in 10,000 years. Then, I heard the sound. It wasn't a growl, it was a huffing noise, the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing coming from the base of the tower. Ha, ha, ha. It sounded like a large dog after a long run, but the volume was too loud. The lungs behind that breath had to be the size of a man's torso. I clicked on my headlamp and looked down through the steel grating of the ladder. About 50 feet below me, standing right next to my truck, was a shape. In the dim light, I thought it was a bear. It was massive, maybe 700 pounds of dark, coarse hair. But as it moved, I realized the anatomy was all wrong. It wasn't shambling. It was pacing on its hind legs with a terrifying upright stability. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking in the cold air. The creature stopped. It didn't look up with the jerky motion of an animal. It slowly tilted its head back, its neck extending in a way that looked human, yet grotesque. My headlamp hit its face. It had the elongated snout of a timber wolf, but the eyes weren't amber or green. They were a dull, flat blue, the color of a frozen lake. And they didn't have the shine of a nocturnal animal. They looked like human eyes sunken into a skull that was far too large. It didn't howl. It let out a sound that I still hear every time I close my eyes. It was a laugh. A deep, wheezing human laugh that ended in a sharp, barking cough. Elias, the signal is weak. The voice didn't come from its throat. It came from my own radio, still clipped to my belt. The speaker hissed with static, and through the noise, I heard my own voice, the voice I'd used to check in with dispatch an hour ago, being played back to me in a distorted, rhythmic loop. I gripped the cold steel rungs of the tower until my knuckles went numb. My headlamp flickered, the beam dancing across the creature's matted fur. It didn't retreat into the shadows. Instead, it sat back on its haunches, watching me with a patient, predatory intelligence. The stench of wet iron and rot rose up the tower in waves. It was thick, almost oily, coating the back of my throat. I looked at my truck, parked just 20 feet from the base of the ladder. The driver's side door was hanging open. I'd left it that way in my rush to finish the repair. The creature reached out a limb. It wasn't a paw. It was a hand-long, black-taloned fingers with an opposable thumb covered in the same coarse charcoal hair. It gripped the edge of my truck's door and slowly, deliberately pushed it shut. Slam. The sound echoed through the jack pines like a gunshot. Checking the levels. Elias, the radio, hissed on my hip. The voice was mine, but the cadence was staggered, as if the creature were learning how to pace human speech in real time. Everything is within parameters. I unclipped the radio and stared at it. The power light was dead. The batteries were back in the truck. Yet, the speaker continued to vibrate, projecting a sound that felt like it was being pulled directly out of my memory. Then, the creature began to climb. It didn't use the ladder. It gripped the diagonal steel supports of the tower, its powerful hind legs pushing off the crossbeams with a terrifying rhythmic force. Clack, clang, clack. It moved with a vertical agility that no bear or wolf could ever possess. It moved like a man who had forgotten he had a soul and remembered he had claws. I scrambled upward, back toward the small technician's platform at the 200-foot mark. My breath came in ragged, burning gasps. The wind at this height was biting, tearing at my face, but I barely felt the cold. All I felt was the vibration in the steel, the heavy, purposeful thrum of something massive ascending toward me. I reached the platform and collapsed onto the grated flooring. I looked down. The dogman had stopped 40 feet below me. It was hanging off the side of the tower, one hand gripped around a steel strut, the other dangling freely. It tilted its snout upward, sniffing the air. The moonlight caught its teeth not just canines, but a full set of broad, flat molars in the back, like a human's. It began to whistle. It was a soft, melodic tune, a lullaby my mother used to sing to me in our cabin near Cadillac when the winter storms got too loud. It whistled perfectly, every note hitting the exact frequency of my childhood comfort, but distorted by the wheezing breath of a beast. Elias, it's cold in the jack pines. The dead radio whispered, "Come down to the den. The cycle is ending. N. The creature started to pull itself up again, its blue eyes locked onto mine. It wasn't hungry. It was expectant. It was looking at me the way a man looks at a long-lost brother. The platform beneath me shuddered. It was a subtle rhythmic vibration, like the beating of a massive, distant heart. I crawled to the edge of the grating, my fingers white-knuckled against the safety rail. The dogman had stopped its ascent, its body coiled around the steel skeleton of the tower just 20 feet below. It hung there, suspended in the moonlight, its long, charcoal-colored ears twitching as it caught the wind. Then, it tilted its head back and opened its maw. I expected a howl, the classic blood-curdling sound of the Michigan wilderness. But what came out was a low-frequency hum. It was a mechanical drone, a perfect imitation of the high-voltage transformers at the base of the station. The sound vibrated through my bones, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. From the darkness of the jack pines below, the forest answered. At first, it was just one. A short, sharp bark that sounded like a man coughing into a tin can. Then another, and another. Soon, the woods were alive with a cacophony of wrong sounds. The screech of rusted hinges, the slamming of car doors, the whistle of a boiling tea kettle. They weren't animals. They were a collection of stolen noises, a symphony of human life played back through the throats of predators. I looked down and saw them. Emerging from the shadows of the tree line were 6 more of them. They moved with a loping, upright gait, their blue eyes reflecting the moonlight like a trail of cold sapphire fire. They didn't growl, they didn't snap at each other. They moved with a synchronized military precision, forming a circle around the base of my tower. The dogman on the tower began to climb again. I scrambled toward the emergency junction box on the platform. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the latch. I knew this tower had a security override, a high-voltage deterrent system meant to keep vultures and crows from nesting in the microwave dishes. Elias, don't break the circuit, my radio hissed. The voice was no longer just mine. It was my mother's voice, my father's voice, and the voice of the dispatcher from Cadillac, all layered into a sickening harmonic chord. The creature's hand, long, black-clawed, and horribly human, gripped the edge of the platform. Its head rose above the grating. Up close, I could see the pores in its snout, the graying hair around its muzzle, and the sheer, cold intelligence in those flat blue eyes. It looked at me with a strange, melancholic pity. I slammed the override switch. A brilliant arc of blue electricity hissed across the platform. The smell of scorched ozone and burnt hair filled the air instantly. The creature let out a sound I will never forget. Not a scream of pain, but a gasp of pure surprise, like a man who had just been told a devastating secret. It lost its grip. I watched it fall. It didn't flinch or flail. It fell like a stone, its dark form shrinking into the shadows below. I heard a dull, wet thud as it hit the forest floor. The chorus in the woods stopped instantly. For a moment, there was a silence so absolute it felt like the world had ended. No wind, no static, no breathing. I leaned over the rail, my headlamp cutting a weak path through the dark, trying to find the body. The figure in the truck didn't blink. It sat perfectly upright, its hands gripped at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, illuminated by the cold green glow of the dashboard. From 200 feet up, I could see the reflection of my own headlamp in its eyes. They weren't brown like mine. Even from this height, I could see that flat, frozen blue staring back at me. I gripped the junction box, my knuckles bleeding from the cold. "Get out of my truck," I screamed, but the wind stripped the words from my lips and tossed them into the jack pines. The other Elias slowly raised a hand. It mirrored the exact gesture I had made a second ago, a stiff, tentative wave. Then it leaned forward and pressed its face against the glass of the windshield. The skin of its forehead flattened against the window, but the nose didn't squash like human cartilage should. It stayed rigid. The radio on my belt, fried and blackened from the electrical surge, began to vibrate one last time. "Elias, the swap is recorded," the voice said. It was no longer a mimicry. It was a perfect, crystal clear broadcast of my own thoughts. The 7th year requires a guardian for the dirt and a guardian for the light. Below, the 6 other shapes emerged from the tree line. They didn't attack the truck. They gathered around it like a protective detail, their upright forms casting long, jagged shadows across the gravel. The me in the truck shifted the gear into drive. I watched. helpless, as my own vehicle began to roll away. It followed the service road with a clinical, perfect precision, navigating the ruts and mud as if it had been driving them for a century. The dogmen loped alongside it, their movements fluid and silent, disappearing into the gray fog of the Manistee National Forest. I was left alone on the tower. I waited for the sun. I expected the dawn to break the spell, for the wrongness to evaporate with the morning dew. But as the sky turned a pale, sickly gray, I realized the temperature wasn't rising. The frost on the steel rungs didn't melt. I climbed down. My movements were stiff. My joints felt heavy, as if my bones had been replaced with lead. When I finally reached the bottom, I walked to the spot where the creature had fallen. There was no blood, no fur, just a set of tire tracks leading away, and a single, human-shaped depression in the frost. I knelt down and touched the ground. The dirt didn't feel like soil. It felt like hair. I looked at my hands. The skin was turning a dull, waxy gray. My fingernails were darkening, hardening into something sharp and translucent. I reached for my throat, but I couldn't feel my pulse. Instead, I felt a low-frequency hum vibrating in my chest, the exact same frequency as the microwave relay above me. I didn't go back to Cadillac. I didn't call for help. I walked into the jack pines, following the scent of wet iron and old blood. My loping stride felt natural. The upright posture felt like a memory I was finally remembering. If you're driving through Wexford County in a year ending in 7 and you see a Ranger truck pulled over on the side of a dead-end road, don't honk. And if you see a man in a technician's uniform standing perfectly still in the tree line, staring at you with flat blue eyes, don't wave. He's just waiting for the next cycle. He's just waiting for someone to come and check the signal. Because the signal never dies. It just finds a better conductor. But there was no body. In the center of the clearing, right where the creature should have been, was my truck. The lights were on, the engine was idling, and sitting in the driver's seat, staring up at me through the windshield with a wide, fixed grin was me.